They say the most formidable adversary isn't the one who flaunts their strength, but the one who observes in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the Sangre Negro cartel ventured across the border into Copper Canyon, Arizona, they believed they were targeting an isolated elderly couple tending to a struggling cattle ranch. They couldn't have been more mistaken. Frank and Margaret Sullivan had been harboring a secret for decades, one that would transform this quiet borderland into a brutal lesson about misjudging appearances and consequences. Their son wasn't simply another soldier serving abroad. He was Commander James Sullivan, the legendary leader of SEAL Team 3's most elite combat unit, and the cartel had just committed the gravest error in their organization's history. They threatened his parents. Some claim you can measure a person's true power by their weapons and resources. Others maintain that genuine strength lies in knowing precisely when to deploy them. Today, an overconfident cartel is about to discover the truth in both perspectives, learning too late that they didn't merely challenge vulnerable ranchers. They ignited a war with a family that knows exactly how to conclude one with decisive finality. The morning sun had barely crested the rugged mountains surrounding Copper Canyon when Frank Sullivan began his daily inspection of the property's perimeter fence. At 68, his movements remained purposeful and efficient, his weathered face bearing the distinctive lines of a man who had spent his life working outdoors. 42 years of ranching had taught him to read the subtle signs others might overlook. Disturbed soil, unusual animal behavior, the distinctive patterns of vehicle tracks in the desert terrain. Something felt different this morning. The border had been unusually quiet lately, the kind of quiet that experienced frontiersmen recognized as a prelude to trouble. Margaret Sullivan stood on the wide porch of their modest ranch house, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, watching her husband methodically check each section of fencing. Her calloused hands unconsciously brushed against the secure satellite phone tucked into her apron pocket, the encrypted communication device their son had insisted they keep with them at all times. "Frank," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard with surprising strength. "Sheriff Dawson's coming up the drive." The sheriff's patrol vehicle approached along the dusty private road, leaving a plume of amber dust in its wake. Tom Dawson had been their friend for over 3 decades, but today his usually affable expression was replaced by one of professional concern. Frank noted how the sheriff's right hand rested near his holstered weapon as he stepped from the vehicle. "Morning, Tom," Frank greeted, immediately registering the unusual tension in his old friend's posture. "Bit early for a social call." "Wish it was social," Dawson replied, his eyes methodically scanning the distant ridgeline where the Sullivan property approached the border. "Got reports of unusual activity along the southern boundary. Professional types, not your typical smugglers or desperate migrants." Margaret emerged from the house carrying a tray with 3 mugs of coffee, her movements unhurried, yet her gaze sharp and evaluative. Despite her 73 years, there remained something formidable in her bearing, a quiet strength that commanded respect. To establish new distribution routes. "Your ranch provides ideal conditions. Good visibility, access to the state highway, plenty of outbuildings for storage." Frank took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression revealing nothing. "And might want to consider staying with your sister in Phoenix for a while," Dawson suggested carefully, the concern evident in his voice. "At least until Border Patrol can increase their presence in the sector." Margaret's laugh carried a surprising edge of steel. This is our home, Tom. Been here since before you pinned on that badge. Besides, Frank added, his voice level, our family is exactly where it needs to be right now. 20 miles south, Alejandro Vega, the ambitious regional commander of the Sangre Negro cartel, studied satellite images of the Sullivan ranch spread across a tactical table. His lieutenant, Marco Ortiz, marked potential access points with practiced precision. Just 2 old Americans, Ortiz reported, his tone dismissive. Sons military, but deployed overseas. Local law enforcement is understaffed and underfunded. Response time minimum 20 minutes from the town center. Vega traced a finger along the route from their staging area to the Sullivan property. And our contact in Border Patrol confirmed the Sun's deployment. Special forces, you said? Some kind of elite unit, Ortiz confirmed with a shrug. But nothing that concerns us. By the time he learns anything, we'll be firmly established. Back at the ranch, Margaret organized supplies in their reinforced cellar, checking inventory with practiced efficiency. Her fingers momentarily lingered on the hidden compartment Frank had installed years ago, remembering their son's instructions. One call, James had told them during his last visit home. That's all it takes. I don't care where I am or what mission. I'm running. You make that call, I'll come. Frank joined her, carrying additional ammunition for the ranch's defensive weapons cache. Tom's worried. Tom's always worried, Margaret replied, but her hand remained close to the satellite phone, in her pocket. Remember what James taught us about patience. Sometimes the best defense is letting your enemy think they've already won, Frank quoted, a hint of pride in his voice. Their son had taught them far more than just emergency protocols during his infrequent visits home. At the town's only diner, Elena Morales served coffee to strangers, whose clothing and demeanor immediately registered as out of place. Their questions about local properties, particularly the Sullivan place, carried a false casualness that raised her suspicions. She called Sheriff Dawson as soon as they left. They claimed to be real estate investors, she reported, but their Spanish wasn't regional, and they were too interested in the Sullivan Ranch's layout. Throughout the afternoon, subtle signs of impending trouble accumulated across Copper Canyon. Dr. Michael Chen noticed unmarked vehicles passing his clinic, their occupants scanning the surroundings with too much attention to detail for typical tourists. Deputy Rodriguez reported unusual radio interference along the border region, small indications that, when combined, suggested coordinated movement approaching the area. In their preparation compound, Vega finalized operational plans with his lieutenants. Tomorrow we move. By sunset, the Sullivan Ranch becomes Sangre Negro territory. Make sure our friends in local law enforcement understand their role. And the old couple? Ortiz asked, his expression revealing nothing. Vega's careless shrug communicated years of casual violence. Give them one chance to leave quietly. After that, he gestured vaguely. Accidents happen on remote ranches all the time. As evening approached, Frank and Margaret sat on their porch swing, sharing coffee and watching the sunset paint their land in hues of gold and crimson. 4 decades of ranching had taught them to read the subtle signs in the landscape, in the town's unusual quiet, in the too still border region beyond their property. Should we call him? Margaret asked softly, her fingers brushing against the satellite phone in her pocket. Frank studied the distant tree line, where unnatural movement suggested concealed vehicles. Not yet. James taught us to gather intelligence first. Let them. You think we're exactly what we appear to be, just a couple of old ranchers. Too old to fight, Margaret added. her smile carrying echoes of shared memories. "Too stubborn to run," Frank completed, the corners of his eyes crinkling with determination. As darkness settled over Copper Canyon, more cartel vehicles gathered in the shadows beyond the town limits. The Sangre Negro operatives were about to learn an expensive lesson about appearances and assumptions. Sometimes the most dangerous opponents aren't those who announce their capabilities with threats and displays of force, but those who wait, quietly, gathering strength and intelligence until the perfect moment to strike. The satellite phone remained silent in Margaret's pocket, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. Soon, Sangre Negro would discover that threatening the Sullivan ranch wasn't merely a tactical miscalculation. It was the kind of catastrophic error that ended criminal organizations. In their modest bedroom, Frank checked the secure cabinet, hidden behind a false panel that appeared to be nothing more than decorative wainscoting. Inside, tactical equipment that would seem entirely out of place in an elderly couple's ranch house waited in perfect order. Night vision devices, encrypted, communication systems and defensive weapons, all meticulously maintained according to their son's instructions. "James called it the grey advantage," Margaret remarked, watching her husband inspect each item with practiced hands that belied his age. "No one suspects the elderly until it's too late." Frank nodded, his movements revealing a familiarity with tactical equipment that few would expect from a retired cattle rancher. He said that's why they put him through those specialized courses when he made commander. The best advantages are the ones your opponent doesn't know exist. Margaret's fingers traced the framed photograph on their bedside table. Their son, in his formal uniform during his promotion ceremony, his expression serious yet proud. What those who threatened them couldn't possibly know was that Commander Sullivan hadn't just taught his parents basic self-defense. Over years of visits home, he had systematically trained them in advanced counter-surveillance, tactical communication, and defensive positioning appropriate for their age and capabilities. "They'll come at dawn," Frank said, his voice steady, as he closed the cabinet. "Standard tactical approach. James always said dawn attacks are preferred when dealing with civilians." "Then we should get some rest," Margaret replied practically. "Remember what James always says about sleep discipline before potential engagement." As they prepared for bed, following routines established over 42 years of marriage, neither displayed any sign of fear. There was only the calm readiness of people who understood exactly what was coming and had prepared thoroughly for this possibility. The satellite phone remained within reach, but they weren't ready to use it. Not yet. Across Copper Canyon, similar. Preparations were underway as word spread quietly through trusted channels. Sheriff Dawson reviewed security arrangements with his most reliable deputies. Elena positioned her teenage sons strategically in the family's hunting cabins, overlooking key access roads. Dr. Chen prepared his clinic for potential casualties, while ensuring certain critical supplies were hidden from view. None of these preparations would be apparent to cartel observers watching the town. To outside eyes, Copper Canyon appeared to be settling in for a typical quiet night along the border. Only those who knew what to look for would notice the subtle indicators of a community quietly organizing its defense around its most vulnerable-seeming members. 20 miles south, Vega conducted his final briefing, confident in his overwhelming tactical advantage against two elderly ranchers and an understaffed sheriff's department. What he couldn't know was that his organization was advancing toward a confrontation that had been anticipated and prepared for with a level of professional thoroughness that would have impressed the military's most elite strategic planners. The quiet night deepened as both sides completed their preparations. By all appearances, the coming conflict seemed drastically mismatched. A powerful cartel organization against an elderly couple on an isolated ranch. But appearances, as Sangre Negro was about to discover, could be devastatingly deceptive. At the town's only diner, Elena Morales watched the vehicles through her window as she prepared for the morning rush. Her 20 years serving Border Patrol agents had taught her to recognize the subtle indicators of dangerous men, the way they scanned their surroundings, the calculated spacing of their vehicles, the slight bulge of concealed weapons beneath expensive jackets. "Coffee, gentlemen?" she asked as two men entered, noting how they positioned themselves with clear sightlines to both the entrance and the kitchen door. "We'll be here a while," the leader replied, his accent more polished than border Spanish, "waiting for some business associates at the Sullivan ranch." Eleanor's face revealed nothing as she poured their coffee, but her mind was already calculating who needed to be warned and how quickly she could relay the information without raising suspicion. At the ranch, Frank worked his fields as usual, but his tractor's route kept him within sight of their equipment barns and the main access road. To casual observers, he appeared to be conducting routine maintenance. Only someone with tactical training would notice how his pattern systematically provided maximum visibility of potential approach vectors. Margaret tended to her garden, her wide-brimmed hat concealing how carefully she monitored the ridgeline to the south. "Movement in the Penasco Arroyo," she called out casually, as if commenting on the weather. "3 figures. Professional setup." Frank adjusted his course slightly, seemingly focused on a problematic irrigation line. "How many?" 3 visible. Carrying equipment, not typical smuggler gear. Observation team, not a crossing party. Her assessment was delivered with the calm precision of someone who had been trained to distinguish between different types of border traffic. The satellite phone weighed heavy in Margaret's apron pocket, but they had agreed, not yet. James had trained them in intelligence-gathering principles. Let the enemy reveal their full operational plan before responding. Premature reaction could compromise their understanding of the true threat scale. Sheriff Dawson's patrol car pulled up to their fence line, his arrival timed to appear like a routine check-in with local property owners. "Got some interesting visitors in town," he reported, leaning against the fence post. "Their paperwork's perfect, too perfect." "Fancy SUVs?" Frank asked, killing the tractor's engine. "4 vehicles, at least 12 men that I can count." Dawson confirmed. "But that's just what they want us to see." Margaret brought out fresh lemonade, her movements unhurried and precise. "And what don't they want us to see, Tom?" Border Patrol caught their sensor grid being disabled sector by sector. Professional job. Military-grade equipment. Someone's clearing a path, and it leads straight through your property. In the cartel's temporary command center, housed in an abandoned hunting lodge 12 miles south, Alejandro Vega reviewed thermal imaging of the Sullivan ranch. His operations had always succeeded through meticulous planning, combined with overwhelming force. "Their routines are consistent," Ortiz reported, spreading surveillance photos across the tactical table. "The old man works the fields until noon. Woman tends her garden. Makes supply runs to town every other day. No security systems, no guard dogs, not even basic cameras." Vega studied the photos. particularly the images of the elderly couple going about their daily chores, and the son, still deployed. Our contact in military intelligence confirmed he's running some classified operation in the Middle East. Won't be a factor. Ortiz's smile carried cruel confidence. When we move, the local sheriff will understand the value of looking the other way. Back in town, Dr. Chen treated one of the cartel's advance men for a minor laceration. The man's cover story about being a real estate investor might have worked if Chen hadn't noticed the distinctive calluses on his hands, the kind that came from extensive weapons handling, not office work. Lot of investors in town lately, Chen commented carefully as he applied the final bandage, mentally documenting the man's description and the suspicious bulge under his tailored jacket. Deputy Rodriguez reported more vehicles gathering at the abandoned hunting lodge. They're not even trying to hide anymore, Sheriff. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Sheriff Dawson gathered his most trusted deputies in the station's back room. I've contacted state police, but their nearest tactical unit is 3 hours out. By then, we could evacuate the Sullivans, Deputy Garcia suggested. They won't leave, Dawson replied with certainty. And something tells me they know more about handling trouble than they let on. At the ranch, Frank and Margaret prepared. For evening, their actions appearing normal to any observer. They checked irrigation lines, secured equipment, and fed their livestock. But each movement completed another step in preparations they'd developed over years. Storage barns are ready, Frank reported as they sat down to dinner. Just like James showed us. Margaret nodded, serving pot roast as if this were any ordinary evening. Elena called. Our visitors made quite an impression in town. Very professional, very polite. Too polite, Frank observed. The kind of polite that carries threats behind smiles. In his command center, Vega finalized tomorrow's operation with his lieutenants. First team secures the perimeter at dawn. Second team approaches from the north, looking like ordinary ranch suppliers. By noon, we control every access point. By sunset, the Sullivan Ranch belongs to Sangre Negro. And the old couple? One of his men asked. One chance to sell. After that, Vega's expression hardened. This territory's too valuable for complications. As night fell over Copper Canyon, more cartel vehicles arrived under cover of darkness. They moved with tactical precision, establishing observation posts with professional efficiency. Everything suggested a well-planned operation conducted by experienced men. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. In focusing on the Sullivans' apparent vulnerability, they'd forgotten a simple truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous opponents were the ones who didn't look dangerous at all. In their farmhouse, Frank and Margaret prepared for bed, following their usual routine. The satellite phone remained silent in its hiding place, but their fingers brushed against it with growing frequency. They're getting bolder, Margaret noted, watching headlights move along their southern fence line. Frank drew the curtains. Let them. James always said the most dangerous moment for any operation is when they think they've already won. Outside, Sangre Negro continued their preparations, unaware they were falling into a trap decades in the making. They thought they were dealing with simple ranchers, too old to fight and too weak to resist. Tomorrow would teach them otherwise. Meanwhile, at a classified location thousands of miles away, Commander James Sullivan reviewed satellite data showing unusual vehicle movement along the Arizona border. His team was preparing for an entirely different operation against high-value targets, but something about the pattern caught his attention. "Sir, Lieutenant Reyes approached with updated intelligence reports. "We're ready for the mission briefing." Sullivan studied the thermal images showing vehicle concentrations near Copper Canyon. "Get me everything we have on cartel activity in that sector, particularly around this location." He indicated a point on the map that corresponded precisely with his parents' ranch. Reyes raised an eyebrow, but asked no questions. In his years serving under Sullivan, he'd learned to trust the commander's instincts. "Right away, sir." Back at the ranch, Frank checked their defensive preparations one final time before joining Margaret in bed. Unlike most elderly couples in remote locations, the Sullivans' bedroom contained several hidden features James had helped them install over the years. Reinforced walls, emergency communication systems, and escape routes that weren't visible to casual inspection. "Do you remember the first time James brought his team here?" Margaret asked softly as they lay in the darkness. Frank smiled at the memory. 5 of America's most elite warriors, using our ranch for rural tactical training. Said our property had optimal terrain diversity for their exercises. And then he taught us how to use that terrain, Margaret added. Said it was important we understood our own defensive advantages. What the cartel couldn't know was that over multiple visits, Commander Sullivan had systematically trained his parents to utilize their ranch's natural features for security. Every rise in the land, every cluster of rocks, every building placement had been evaluated through the eyes of a special operations commander. The Sullivans didn't just own their ranch. They understood its tactical significance in ways that only military strategists typically would. Across Copper Canyon, Sheriff Dawson made his final preparations for morning. He distributed his deputies strategically throughout the area, positioned to observe rather than engage. Dawson had spent enough time with Frank and Margaret over the years to suspect they had resources beyond what was apparent. He'd seen the subtle security measures on their property, noticed Frank's surprising familiarity with tactical concepts during casual conversations, observed Margaret's remarkable awareness of her surroundings at all times. "Keep our people back, unless absolutely necessary," he instructed Deputy Rodriguez during their midnight check-in. "I have a feeling the Sullivans may have this more under control than it appears." In the pre-dawn darkness, Vega dispatched his first surveillance teams to establish positions around the ranch perimeter. They moved with the silent efficiency of men experienced in covert operations, using night vision equipment and encrypted communications. By all professional assessments, they were executing a textbook infiltration of unsuspecting civilian property. What they couldn't detect were the passive monitoring systems James had installed throughout the ranch, sensors that detected their movement, cameras disguised as ordinary ranch fixtures that recorded their positions, and silent alarms that alerted Frank and Margaret to exactly where the intruders were located. "Perimeter team in position," came the first report to Vega. "No. Signs of awareness from the main house. Targets appear to be sleeping." Vega smiled with satisfaction. By tomorrow evening, Sangre Negro would control a critical piece of border territory, and the old couple would be gone, one way or another. Everything was proceeding according to plan, except it wasn't their plan that was unfolding. In their bedroom, Frank and Margaret Sullivan were wide awake, monitoring the cartel's movements on tablets connected to their hidden security system. They weren't panicked or frightened. They were methodical, identifying each team's position and composition. With the calm precision James had drilled into them, Southeastern Ridge, three-man team with long-range observation equipment, Frank noted, marking their position on a digital map of the property. Western Approach, two-man team establishing communications relay, Margaret added, making her own notation. Neither felt the fear that the cartel expected from elderly ranchers discovering armed intruders on their property. Instead, they felt the focused alertness that came from extensive preparation and absolute confidence in their capabilities. James had trained them well, not to fight like SEALs, but to think like them, to understand threat assessment, to recognize tactical patterns, and most importantly, to use an enemy's assumptions against them. They'll maintain observation through morning, Frank predicted, based on the tactical dispositions they were witnessing. Main approach likely after we establish our daily routine, just as James said they would, Margaret nodded. Predictable. In his distant command center, Commander Sullivan was now fully briefed on the unusual activities near his parents' ranch. Satellite imagery, intelligence reports, and border patrol data all pointed to a significant Sangre Negro operation, centered precisely on his family's property. "Sir," Lieutenant Reyes reported with concern, "local law enforcement reports multiple cartel-affiliated vehicles entering Copper Canyon. They're establishing control points around your parents' ranch." Sullivan's expression hardened as he reviewed the tactical display. "Show me their deployment pattern." First light hadn't yet touched the rugged mountains surrounding Copper Canyon when Sangre Negro made their opening move. 3 black SUVs pulled into the Sullivans' long gravel driveway, tires crunching on the desert stones. Alejandro Vega himself led this visit, believing in establishing dominance early through personal presence. Frank Sullivan was already in his front yard, checking his weather station with the same methodical attention he'd given it every morning for decades. His experienced eyes quickly assessed the professional spacing of the vehicles, noting how the drivers maintained clear fields of fire while appearing casual. "Bit early for visitors," he called out, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man comfortable on his own land. Vega emerged from the lead vehicle, wearing an expensive suit that seemed absurdly out of place in the dusty ranch environment. 2 men flanked him, their casual stances betraying years of tactical training and readiness. "Mr. Sullivan, I apologize for the hour," Vega said with practiced charm, "but business doesn't always keep to convenient times." Margaret appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'll put on coffee." "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Sullivan," Vega replied smoothly. "This won't take long." Vega produced a leather portfolio containing professional-looking documents. "I represent a development consortium interested in acquiring properties in this region. We're prepared to make a very generous offer for your ranch." Frank studied the papers without touching them. "Not interested in selling?" "You haven't heard our offer," Vega countered, his smile tightening slightly. "Don't need to. This land isn't for sale." Vega's expression shifted subtly, the veneer of civility thinning. "Mr. Sullivan, the region is changing. Small operations like yours are becoming vulnerable. Equipment failures, supply chain issues, accidents, rural ranching can be hazardous." "That a threat, son?" Frank's tone remained conversational, but something in his eyes had hardened. "Simply business reality," Vega replied. "We prefer to be generous, but we will acquire this property one way or another." Meanwhile, at a military airfield thousands of miles away, Commander Sullivan's team was already boarding transport aircraft. Standard deployment protocols had been compressed through high-level authorization that few outside the special operations community could access. "Sir," Lieutenant Reyes approached with updated intelligence. We have confirmation of cartel vehicles at your parents' property. Satellite shows 3 SUVs at the main house. Sullivan studied the tactical display showing thermal signatures of the vehicles and their occupants. Time to destination. 6 hours, assuming mid-air refueling and immediate transport from the landing zone. Sullivan's expression remained professionally neutral, but the slight tightening of his jaw told Reyes everything. This wasn't just another mission for the commander. Back at the ranch, Margaret watched the confrontation from the porch, noting details others might miss. The communication devices disguised as jewelry, the slight bulge of body armor beneath. Expensive shirts, the strategically positioned vehicles, allowing quick egress. Your coffee's getting cold in the kitchen, she called out to Frank, her voice carrying a hint of steel beneath the hospitality. Vega glanced at Margaret, then back to Frank. Your wife's concerned about manners. You should be concerned about safety. This is cartel territory now. Cartel. Frank raised an eyebrow. You just said you represented developers. Vega's laugh carried no humor. Semantics, old man. The point is we control this region now. Small ranches like yours survive only through our good graces. This is still America, Frank replied evenly. Still laws here. Laws change, Vega countered. By sunset tomorrow, this ranch will have new owners. The only question is whether the transaction will be pleasant or messy. In town, Sheriff Dawson watched more cartel vehicles arrive, their professional movement patterns confirming his worst fears. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were trained operators using cartel violence as cover for something more organized. They're setting up checkpoints, Deputy Rodriguez reported. Look like normal traffic stops, but they're controlling access to every road leading to the Sullivan place. Dr. Chen's clinic received an unexpected delivery, advanced medical supplies, and a generous donation from anonymous benefactors. The message was clear: be ready, stay quiet. At the diner, Elena served coffee to more cartel soldiers disguised as businessmen. Their weapons weren't hidden anymore, their threats no longer subtle. Shame about the Sullivan place, one said loudly enough to be overheard. Old ranches like that, so many things can go wrong. Equipment failures, fuel leaks, fires. Back at the ranch, Vega made one final attempt at persuasion, his patience clearly wearing thin. Consider your position carefully, Mr. Sullivan. By this time tomorrow, Sangre Negro will control this territory. Cooperation now ensures a comfortable retirement. Resistance, he shrugged eloquently. Well, accidents happen. That they do, Frank agreed, his tone matching Vega's casual menace. Sometimes to people who don't understand what they're really dealing with. Margaret's voice carried from the porch, steel now evident beneath the politeness. Your coffee is getting cold, gentlemen. Sure you won't stay? Vega studied them both, searching for signs of fear and finding none. The old couple's calm was unexpected. Perhaps they didn't fully grasp the situation. 24 hours, Mr. Sullivan, he said finally. Choose wisely. As the cartel vehicles departed, Margaret joined her husband in the yard. They didn't. Notice? No, Frank confirmed. Too focused on intimidation to see what's right in front of them. James would be disappointed in their tactical awareness. What the cartel had failed to observe were the subtle security measures integrated throughout the property. Cameras disguised as ordinary fixtures, passive sensors hidden in natural features, and defensive preparations that looked like everyday ranch equipment. In the cartel's command center, Ortiz reviewed surveillance footage of the encounter. Something's not right. They're too calm. They're old ranchers. Vega dismissed the concern. What do they know about real power? But he'd missed crucial details. The way Frank had positioned himself to observe their vehicle's blind spots, how Margaret's casual movements had carefully documented their weapons and equipment, and most importantly, the satellite phones. Transmissions sending encrypted data about their entire operation to a military base thousands of miles away. As morning fully arrived, Sangre Negro continued their preparations, establishing control points around Copper Canyon with professional efficiency. Everything suggested a well-planned operation conducted by experienced men, but they'd made another critical mistake. In focusing on the Sullivans' apparent vulnerability, they'd forgotten to ask a crucial question. Why would a SEAL team commander ensure his elderly parents had military-grade satellite communications? The answer would cost them dearly. Midday sun beat down on Copper Canyon as Sangre Negro tightened their grip. Their men moved through town with calculated purpose, no longer bothering to hide their true nature. Store owners found themselves receiving unexpected security inspections, and roads leading to the Sullivan Ranch saw increasing patrols of black SUVs. Commander Sullivan stood in his airborne operations center, studying the data his parents had transmitted. The satellite photos showed professional deployment patterns and tactical positioning he recognized from combat zones. "Show me their deployment pattern," he instructed Reyes. The tactical display revealed what Sangre Negro thought was a perfect containment strategy. But Sullivan immediately identified critical vulnerabilities in their positioning. "They're using standard cartel enforcement protocols," Reyes observed. "No," Sullivan corrected. "They're using military protocols. These aren't ordinary cartel soldiers. They're professionals, which means they'll be predictable." At the ranch, Frank worked his fields with methodical precision. To any observer, he was simply tending his crops, but his tractor's path was slowly adjusting the irrigation system to create areas that would become impassable to vehicles. Margaret hung laundry on the line, her movements unhurried. Each piece of clothing was carefully positioned to block sightlines from the cartel's observation posts. Years of James's instruction had taught them how to hide preparations in plain sight. In town, Sheriff Dawson faced mounting pressure as another cartel team arrived at his office, their polite smiles carrying clear threats. "Your department has been selected for a special security partnership," their leader explained. "Generous funding, new equipment. All we need is your cooperation regarding certain properties." "Like the Sullivan Ranch," Dawson stated flatly. "Smart. Man," the cartel representative nodded. "Understanding that changing times can be very profitable." At her clinic, Dr. Chen treated a local teenager who'd been roughed up for disrespecting cartel vehicles. The boy's father, Jack Peterson, seethed with quiet anger. "They're taking over everything," he muttered. "First the roads, now the town." "Patience," Dr. Chen advised, remembering her own family's stories of resistance in her homeland. Sometimes the strongest opposition isn't the loudest. In their command center, Vega reviewed the latest surveillance of the Sullivan Ranch. Something about the elderly couple's behavior bothering him. "They're too calm," he told Ortiz. "No panic, no desperate calls for help, just routine." "Maybe they don't understand the situation," Ortiz suggested. "No, something else is happening." Vega frowned. "Check their son's military record again. What unit did you say he was with?" just shows special forces, deployment details classified. Ortiz shuffled through papers. Why? Because ordinary ranchers don't remain this calm when threatened by cartel forces, Vega replied, a first hint of unease creeping into his voice. Back at the ranch, Margaret received a call from Elena at the diner. She listened carefully while appearing to discuss produce deliveries. They're positioning men at every major intersection, she reported to Frank afterward. Professional operators using cartel muscle as cover. Frank nodded, making minor adjustments to their barn's machinery. They're establishing a control grid, just like James warned us about. Should we? Margaret's hand moved toward the satellite phone. Not yet. Let's see their full deployment first. At his base, Sullivan briefed his team as they approached the halfway point of their journey. Sangre Negro Cartel is moving to seize territory in Copper Canyon, Arizona. They're using professional military contractors as operators. Your parents' ranch, Chief? Master Chief Peterson asked. Central to their operation, Sullivan confirmed, his voice controlled despite the personal connection. Perfect distribution. E-point, good access roads. He paused briefly. They think they're dealing with vulnerable elderly targets. Lieutenant Reyes studied the tactical display. Local law enforcement compromised. Cartel establishing full control of the town's infrastructure. But they've made several tactical errors. In Copper Canyon, more cartel vehicles arrived hourly. Their men moved with practiced efficiency, systematically isolating key areas. Store owners faced surprise health inspections, and road crews appeared, redirecting traffic away from the Sullivan Ranch. Deputy Rodriguez watched it all with growing concern. They're cutting off every escape route, he reported to Dawson. Professional containment strategy. Not professional enough, Dawson replied, thinking of the Sullivans' calm demeanor when he'd visited them earlier. They missed something important. The ranch, Frank and Margaret continued their seemingly routine activities. Each movement carefully calculated, each task part of a larger plan years in the making. Barns ready, Frank reported during lunch, just like James showed us. Margaret nodded, serving sandwiches while monitoring cartel movements through their kitchen window. They've got men watching both access roads now, trying to look like normal. Traffic. Notice the standard containment formation? Chapter 3 of their playbook, Frank agreed, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. In the cartel's command post, Vega's unease grew. Something about the Sullivans' behavior wasn't matching their intelligence profile. Show me everything we have on their son again, he ordered. Every detail. Ortiz brought up their files. Special forces, current mission classified. Nothing unusual. No, Vega cut him off. That's exactly what's unusual. Too many details hidden, too much classification. We're missing something important. As afternoon approached, Sangre Negro continued strengthening their position. More men arrived, more vehicles took up strategic positions. Everything suggested a perfectly executed takeover operation. But they'd overlooked crucial details. The way Frank's farm equipment was creating defensive positions, disguised as normal field work. How Margaret's garden tools were strategically placed for easy access, and most importantly, they'd missed the military-grade surveillance equipment hidden throughout the property, documenting their every move. At his base, Sullivan made final preparations. Time to show Sangre Negro why some targets aren't as vulnerable as they appear. Then, Copper Canyon. Tension mounted as the sun began its westward descent. The cartel's deadline approached. But the Sullivans showed no signs of yielding. Their calm preparation was about to teach Sangre Negro an expensive lesson about underestimating elderly ranchers who'd spent years learning military tactics from their Navy SEAL son. Late afternoon brought the first real test of Sangre Negro's patience. Two unmarked vans attempted to access the Sullivan Ranch through the north entrance, claiming to be livestock feed suppliers. Frank stood at his gate, shotgun held casually but visibly at his side, the picture of a cautious but ordinary rancher. "Don't recall ordering any feed," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the dusty road. The lead driver, one of Vega's experienced operators, kept his tone professionally pleasant. "Complimentary delivery, sir, courtesy of our new regional agricultural partnership. Frank shifted slightly, positioning himself to watch both vehicles while appearing to simply lean on his fence. "Don't recall signing up for any partnership," Margaret's voice carried from the porch behind him. "Those vans are riding awfully low. For feed trucks." The cartel operators maintained their cover, but Frank noticed their slight tension. These weren't ordinary cartel soldiers. Their movements showed military training, likely former special forces or intelligence operatives now working as private contractors. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside," the leader suggested. "Review the partnership benefits." "Think we'll pass," Frank replied evenly. "Roads are tricky around here. Lot of equipment moving, irrigation lines being adjusted. Wouldn't want your trucks getting stuck." The threat was subtle, but clear. The cartel vehicles retreated, but not before their drivers noticed something odd. The ranch's access roads had been subtly altered since their last surveillance, creating choke points that weren't visible until you were too close to easily turn around. In their command center, Vega received the report with growing frustration. "They've prepared the ground. Simple ranchers don't think about defensive terrain," Ortiz noted with newfound concern. He studied their surveillance photos more carefully now. "Sir, look at their equipment positioning. It's not random. They're creating interlocking fields of fire," Vega finished, the realization dawning that they weren't dealing with typical civilians. On his transport aircraft now entering U.S. airspace, Commander Sullivan reviewed real-time satellite data while his team prepared for deployment. Lieutenant Reyes approached with the latest intelligence update. "They tried accessing the north entrance," he reported. "Your father turned them back using the irrigation defense." Sullivan allowed himself a small smile. Dad always did like using the land itself as a weapon. In Copper Canyon, Sheriff Dawson watched more cartel vehicles arrive. Their operators now moving with obvious tactical precision, no longer bothering to hide their military background. "They're setting up a forward command post at the old Miller place," Deputy Rodriguez reported. "Professional setup, communications gear, surveillance equipment. And our friends at the state level, still claiming jurisdictional issues. We're on our own for at least 8 more hours." Eleanor's diner had become an unofficial observation post. Her regular customers, mostly local ranchers and workers, noted each cartel movement while appearing to enjoy their coffee and meals. "They've got the main road covered," Jack Peterson reported quietly to Dawson, "but they missed the old logging trail behind Thompson's place." Dr. Chen treated another local who'd had a run-in with cartel enforcers, but this time she noticed something different. The young man's accident had resulted in a cartel vehicle mysteriously getting stuck in a newly muddy field that hadn't been there the day before. At the ranch, Margaret monitored their perimeter through cleverly disguised cameras James had installed years ago. They're probing the south fence line now, 3 men moving like professionals. Frank adjusted their barn's machinery, creating noise that would mask any suspicious activity. Getting bolder. Won't be long before they try something more direct. James's equipment is picking up their communications, Margaret noted, reviewing data on a tablet hidden from outside view. They're using military frequencies, encrypted channels. Not encrypted enough, apparently, she replied with quiet satisfaction. In their command post, Vega's frustration grew as another team reported difficulties accessing the Sullivan property. Somehow, every approach had been altered to work against vehicles. Frank's equipment repairs, his field work, the irrigation adjustments, all of it was defensive preparation. "We're not dealing with simple ranchers," he told his lieutenants. "Check their property records, tax filings, everything. Find out who these people really are." Ortiz brought more disturbing news. "Sir, we've got a problem. Those satellite images of the ranch, they're being blocked. Someone's using military-grade counter-surveillance measures." "How? The equipment we saw was ancient ranch machinery." "Look closer," Ortiz suggested, enhancing their photos of what appeared to be ordinary ranch equipment. What looks like old machinery from a distance. Some of it isn't actually connected to anything. On a military transport nearing Arizona, Sullivan's team made final preparations. Master Chief Peterson reviewed their latest intelligence from local assets in Copper Canyon. "Local resistance is growing, sir," he reported. "Subtle but coordinated. Mom and Dad's influence," Sullivan explained. "They taught the town that sometimes the quietest opposition is the most effective." At the ranch, Sangre Negro made their first serious move. A team of 6 operators approached on foot, using professional tactical movement to avoid detection. They expected to easily overwhelm 2 elderly ranchers with superior numbers and training. Instead, they found themselves dealing with terrain that worked against every advance. Simple farm equipment placed to block clean lines of sight, irrigation, creating unstable ground. Even the crops planted in patterns that forced them to move in predictable paths. "Fall back," their team leader ordered after 30 frustrating minutes. "Something's wrong. This isn't random. They've got training." Frank watched them retreat from his position in one of the barns, noting their movements. James was right about their tactics. Professional but predictable. Margaret's voice came through their secure radio system, another of their son's additions disguised as farm equipment. "They'll try a night operation next. Standard escalation." "Let them," Frank replied confidently. "Nights when all our special additions work best." In their command center, Vega received another troubling report. Their background check on James Sullivan had found new details. His military records weren't just classified, they were compartmented at the highest levels. "Sir," Ortiz's voice carried genuine concern as he reviewed the latest intelligence. "I think we've made a serious mistake." The sun began setting over Copper Canyon as both sides prepared for what would come next. Sangre Negro had the numbers, the equipment, and tactical training. But they were about to learn why James Sullivan had spent years teaching his parents about military strategy. Sometimes the most effective defense wasn't about firepower or force. Sometimes it was about making your enemy's strengths work against them, about turning simple ranch work into sophisticated defensive preparation. Very soon, Sangre Negro would learn just how sophisticated the Sullivans' preparations really were. Darkness settled over Copper Canyon like a tactical advantage, but for which side wasn't immediately clear. Sangre Negro launched their night operation with professional precision. 3 teams of 4 operators each, using standard military Infiltration patterns. Team 1 in position. Their lead operator whispered into encrypted communications, beginning approach to primary structure. In their ranch house, Frank and Margaret Sullivan sat calmly at their kitchen table, sharing coffee. Multiple screens, disguised as ordinary picture frames, showed thermal imaging of the approaching teams. "They're using a standard pincer movement," Margaret observed, "just like James said they would." Frank checked their defensive systems, all carefully concealed within ordinary ranch equipment. Walking right into it, professionals always overthink things. The cartel's first team encountered problems immediately. Their night vision equipment, top-of-the-line military gear, began showing strange interference patterns. Seemingly random light sources confused their thermal imaging. "Something's wrong," their team leader reported. "Equipment's malfunctioning." What they didn't realize was that James had spent years preparing his parents' ranch for exactly this scenario. Simple heat lamps normally used for chicken coops were positioned to create false thermal signatures. Solar-powered LED arrays, disguised as ordinary yard lights, emitted patterns that played havoc with night vision equipment. At the cartel's command post, Vega watched his operation unravel. How are two old ranchers doing this? Ortiz brought him more disturbing intelligence. "Sir, about their son's military record, we found something. His unit designation. It's not just classified, it's Team 2 losing tactical advantage." The radio crackled. "Ground's becoming unstable, can't maintain formation." The Sullivans' irrigation system, apparently chaotic during daylight, revealed its true purpose at night. Strategic water distribution had created areas of soft ground, forcing the cartel teams into predictable paths. Meanwhile, Sullivan's team was already in position outside Copper Canyon. Lieutenant Reyes coordinated with local allies through secure channels. "Sheriff Dawson's people have mapped their checkpoints," Reyes reported. "Cartel's using standard military coverage patterns." "Predictable," Sullivan replied. "They're relying on tactical doctrine, makes them vulnerable." In town, Elena's diner remained open late, serving coffee to tired workers. But her customers were actually a network of local observers, each reporting cartel movements through seemingly casual conversations. "Mighty busy night for feed deliveries," one rancher commented, indicating cartel vehicles moving north. "Roads are tricky after dark," another replied. "Easy to get turned around out by the Sullivan place." Sheriff Dawson maintained his visible presence, appearing to cooperate with Sangre Negro while actually coordinating local resistance. His deputies reported every cartel movement, building a detailed picture of their operation. The night operation continued deteriorating for Sangre Negro. Their third team, attempting to breach the ranch's storage areas, found themselves caught in a maze of equipment and containers. Every route that seemed clear led to a dead end or exposed position. "We're being herded," their team leader realized too late. "This whole setup, it's a prepared killing zone." But there were no weapons fired, no direct confrontation. The Sullivans' defense relied on something more sophisticated, using the attackers' own tactical training against them. "Team 3 pulling back," the report came. "Can't maintain tactical advantage." In their command center, Vega's frustration mounted as Ortiz completed his investigation into James Sullivan's military background. "Sir," Ortiz's voice carried genuine alarm. "His unit designation, it's SEAL Team 3. He's not just Special Forces. He's the most elite counterterrorism unit in existence," Vega finished. "And we just threatened his parents." At the ranch, Frank and Margaret continued monitoring the cartel's failed infiltration. Years of James's training had taught them that sometimes the best defense wasn't about confrontation. It was about making the terrain itself your weapon. "They're falling back," Margaret noted, watching the thermal signatures retreat, lost their nerve when their equipment started failing. "James always said professionals are the easiest to stop," Frank replied. "They expect things to work a certain way, can't adapt when nothing follows their rule book." On the outskirts of Copper Canyon, Sullivan's team began implementing their own operation. Years of counterterrorism experience had taught them how to dismantle professional organizations with surgical precision. "Sir," Reyes reported, "local assets confirm Sangre Negro has almost their entire operational force committed to this. Over 40 men, military-grade equipment." "Good," Sullivan replied, his expression focused. "Means they've committed everything to one location. Makes our job simpler." The night grew deeper as Sangre Negro realized their tactical advantage was actually a carefully prepared trap. Every piece of apparent ranch equipment had a defensive purpose. Every routine maintenance project had created another layer of security. "Fall back and regroup," Vega ordered, finally understanding what they were really facing. "We need to reassess our entire approach." But it was too late for reassessment. Sullivan's team was already inside their perimeter, moving with the kind of precision that made SEAL teams legendary. Sangre Negro had brought military tactics to a ranch, only to discover they were dealing with someone who wrote the book on counter-terrorism operations. In their ranch house, Frank and Margaret prepared for what would come next. The satellite phone hummed with an encrypted message. 4 simple words that would change everything. "I'm coming home, Mom." The cartel's night operation had failed completely, but they had yet to realize their worst mistake. They hadn't just threatened a ranch. They'd given one of America's most elite combat units a reason to show exactly why they were considered the best in the world. The first sign that Sangre Negro had severely miscalculated came just after midnight. Their communications network, a sophisticated system using military-grade encryption, began experiencing unexplained failures. One by one, their secure channels went silent. "We're being jammed," Ortiz reported, his fingers flying. Across their command center's keyboards, someone's using advanced countermeasures. This isn't civilian technology. Vega watched his tactical display, showing their checkpoint positions around Copper Canyon. Units that should have been reporting in regularly had gone suspiciously quiet. "Get eyes on Checkpoint 3, he ordered. "They've missed their last 2 check-ins." But Checkpoint 3, staffed by 4 experienced operators, wasn't responding because they were no longer in control of their position. Sullivan's team had moved through their perimeter with the kind of precision that came from years of counter-terrorism operations. Checkpoint 3 secured, Lieutenant Reyes reported through their secure channel. 4 tangos neutralized, non-lethal. Moving to Phase 2. Sullivan's voice carried quiet authority. Maintain communications blackout. Let them think it's equipment failure. Sangre Negro's night operation had effectively trapped them in Copper Canyon. Their own tactical positioning, meant to control the town, now worked against them. Every escape route was covered, every fallback position already compromised. At the Sullivan Ranch, Frank and Margaret continued their seemingly normal evening routine, but their casual movements masked constant coordination with local residents through methods Sangre Negro hadn't detected. The ranch's communication system, disguised as ordinary agricultural equipment, linked them to a network of supporters throughout Copper Canyon. Eleanor says their North team just lost contact with command, Margaret reported, appearing to simply check their chicken coops. Sheriff Dawson's people are redirecting traffic away from the engagement zones, Frank noted, adjusting their barn ventilation system, which cleverly masked the sounds of movement around the property. Jack Peterson's group has their vehicles ready, all positioned according to James's instructions. They think it's just farm equipment broke down in convenient locations. In their increasingly isolated command center, Vega's growing unease turned to genuine concern as more reports arrived. Checkpoints were going dark in a pattern that suggested professional military operation. "Show me satellite coverage," he demanded. But Ortiz's response confirmed his fears. "We've lost access. Someone's blocked our uplink. Military-grade interference." "How many assets are still responding?" Vega asked, the first edge of desperation creeping into his voice. Ortiz studied their tactical display, watching more positions go silent. "We've lost contact with 30% of our force. No distress calls, no combat reports. They're just disappearing." In town, Sheriff Dawson coordinated with Sullivans' advance team through carefully planned channels. His deputies maintained visible patrols, appearing to cooperate with Sangre Negro while actually establishing containment zones. "They're running standard cartel protocols," Dawson reported through secure communications, expecting resistance from local law enforcement, not professional military. Sullivan's response came in encoded bursts that seemed like routine police radio traffic. "Keep their attention focused on standard threats. Let them think they're in control." Dr. Chen's clinic received its first patients from Sangre Negro, operators suffering from precisely applied, non-lethal takedowns. Their injuries showed the hallmarks of professional military close-quarters combat. "They came out of nowhere," one contractor muttered, nursing a dislocated shoulder. "Moving like ghosts. This isn't normal cartel opposition. Sangre Negro's military." Contractors, experienced operators themselves, began recognizing the signs of a professional operation. Their tactical advantages were being systematically eliminated by a force that understood their playbook better than they did. "We're being hunted," a team leader reported before his position went dark. "These aren't local police or federal agents. This is something else." Vega ordered his remaining forces to fall back to defensive positions, but discovered another layer of their miscalculation. The town's layout had been subtly altered. Roads that should have provided tactical movement were blocked by broken-down farm vehicles. Power outages affected strategic areas, creating zones of darkness that worked against their night vision equipment. "They've prepared the entire town," Ortiz realized, the color draining from his face. "Everything we saw as random civilian activity was coordinated preparation." At the ranch, Frank and Margaret monitored the operation's progress through James's encrypted systems. Their son's voice came through briefly, disguised as routine farm business. "Containment phase complete. Moving to reduction operations. Stay alert for stragglers." Margaret's reply, spoken while apparently discussing tomorrow's weather, carried coded confirmation. "Looks like we're in for some clearing up. Might see sunshine before dawn." Sullivan's team moved through Copper Canyon with practiced efficiency, systematically dismantling Sangre Negro's operation. Each tactical position was approached differently, preventing the cartel from predicting their methods. "Sir," Lieutenant Reyes reported, "local assets confirm their command structure is isolated. No communication with outside support." "Good," Sullivan replied. "Maintain pressure. Let them feel the isolation." In their increasingly vulnerable command post, Vega watched years of careful planning unravel. His professional operators, men with military and special forces backgrounds, were being systematically outmaneuvered by an opponent they couldn't effectively fight. "We still have superior numbers," Ortiz argued desperately. "We could mount a direct assault on the ranch. Against a prepared position." Vega's laugh carried no humor. "You saw what they did to our night operation. Everything about that ranch is designed for defense." Sangre Negro's remaining communications crackled with growing panic. More positions going dark, more operators encountering an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Their military training, instead of providing advantage, made them predictable to an opponent who understood their tactics. "Fall back to secondary positions," Vega ordered, but discovered another problem. Their designated fallback points had been compromised, turned into prepared ambush zones by Sullivans. "Team." At Elena's diner, Rosa served coffee to tired operators seeking refuge, noting how their professional demeanor had cracked. These weren't cartel soldiers anymore. They were military contractors realizing they'd walked into a superior forces kill zone. "Never seen anything like it," one muttered to his colleague. "They're inside our decision loop, anticipating every move." Sheriff Dawson's deputies continued their patrols, maintaining the illusion of normal police activity while actually coordinating with Sullivan's team. Each patrol route was carefully planned to help herd Sangre Negro into prepared containment areas. "They're running out of options," Dawson reported through secure channels, "starting to make mistakes." The night deepened as Sangre Negro's operation continued dissolving. Their tactical positions, meant to control the town, had become a trap. Every attempt to regain initiative was met with precise countermoves that suggested intimate knowledge of their procedures. In their command center, Vega received the report that confirmed his worst fears. Their background check on James Sullivan had finally broken through the military's security classifications. "Sir," Ortiz's voice carried genuine dread. "He's not just SEAL Team 3, he's their commander, one of the most successful counterterrorism operators in history, and we threatened his family." Vega slumped in his chair, understanding the full magnitude of their error. What had begun as a simple territory expansion had become a lesson in professional military response. Sangre Negro had brought trained operators to threaten a small town, only to discover they were facing one of the world's most elite fighting units. At the ranch, Frank and Margaret continued their quiet coordination. Years of James's training had prepared them for this moment, teaching them that sometimes the most effective response wasn't about meeting force with force. "They're starting to break," Margaret observed, watching thermal signatures of cartel operators moving with increasing desperation. "James always said professionals are the most predictable," Frank replied. "They can't adapt when nothing fits." Their training. The SEAL team continued their systematic dismantling of Sangre Negro's operation, using the cartel's own tactical positioning against them. Each move was precisely calculated, each response designed to increase the psychological pressure on their opponents. Dawn was still hours away, but Sangre Negro already knew the night belonged to their opponents. They had come to Copper Canyon expecting to overwhelm simple ranchers with professional military tactics. Instead, they were learning why SEAL Team 3 was considered one of the world's most elite counter-terrorism units, and why threatening a commander's family was the kind of mistake that ended organizations. The pre-dawn hours brought Sangre Negro's first desperate counter-move. Vega, watching his operation crumble, ordered a direct assault on the Sullivan ranch. 6 vehicles, 20 of his best operators, all moving with coordinated precision. Full tactical response, he ordered through their remaining secure channel. Overwhelm their defenses with superior numbers. But Sullivan had anticipated this reaction. His team, positioned around the ranch's perimeter, watched the cartel's approach through advanced night vision equipment. They're using standard assault formation, Lieutenant Reyes reported. 3-point convergence just like the manual. Which makes them predictable, Sullivan replied. Trigger the outer defense. The cartel's lead vehicles discovered too late. Why the Sullivans' irregular irrigation patterns weren't really about farming. Strategic water distribution had created areas of unstable ground hidden in the pre-dawn darkness. 2 vehicles bogged down immediately, forcing the others to adjust their approach. Split up, their tactical leader ordered. Teams 2 and 3, circle west. Teams 4 and 5 east approach, but this too played into Sullivan's strategy. The ranch's apparent vulnerabilities were carefully designed channels, herding attacking forces into predetermined zones. Frank and Margaret watched from their reinforced farmhouse as the cartel teams moved exactly where James had predicted they would. Just like his training scenarios, Margaret noted, monitoring their security feeds. Professional soldiers always follow their protocols, Frank replied, activating another set of defenses disguised as farm equipment. That's what makes them vulnerable. The cartel's Western approach team encountered their first real resistance. Hidden strobes, originally installed to deter predators from the livestock, created disorienting patterns that played havoc with night vision equipment. Every alternate route led them into strategically placed farm machinery that forced them to bunch up in exposed positions. We're being channeled, the team leader realized with dawning horror. This whole setup, it's a prepared battle space. In town, Sheriff Dawson coordinated with Sullivan's support team, using his deputies to maintain the illusion of normal police activity while actually cutting off Sangre Negro's escape routes. Their reinforcements are trying to move through Sector 7, Dawson reported through secure channels. Jack Peterson's group has that road blocked with broken-down tractors, came the coded reply. Sangre Negro's eastern assault team made it closer to the ranch, but found themselves dealing with terrain that seemed to actively fight them. Motion, sensors hidden in ordinary farm equipment, triggered strategic defensive measures. Every approach that appeared clear led them into another prepared position. They're toying with us, Ortiz reported from the command center, watching their tactical display show more teams going dark, using our own training against us. Vega, watching years of careful planning dissolve, made another critical error. He ordered his remaining forces to converge on the ranch's main storage barn, believing it to be the weakest point in the Sullivans' defense. Sir, one of his experienced operators objected, that's too obvious. It has to be a trap. It's also our only option, Vega replied, his voice hollow. We've lost containment everywhere else. Sullivan's team watched the cartel forces consolidate, moving exactly as predicted. They're committed to the barn assault, Reyes reported, all remaining units converging. Good, Sullivan replied, his voice calm. Let them think they found our weakness. Mom, Dad, execute Pattern Delta. Frank and Margaret's response came through their secure channel, disguised as casual conversation about farm work. Years of practicing James's defensive scenarios were about to pay off. The cartel's assault force, now concentrated around the barn, discovered too late why Sullivan had spent years teaching his parents about tactical deception. What looked like Ordinary agricultural storage was actually a sophisticated defensive position. "They're in the kill zone," Reyes reported. "Execute containment," Sullivan ordered. "Non-lethal takedowns only. We want them alive for questioning." Sangre Negro's remaining operators, all experienced military contractors, found themselves caught in a masterfully prepared trap. Every exit was covered, every tactical advantage neutralized. Sullivan's team moved with the precision that made SEAL Team 3 legendary. "Multiple targets neutralized," came the reports. Sector clear, perimeter secured." In their command center, Vega watched his tactical display turn into a disaster zone. His professional operators, men with years of military experience, were being systematically taken apart by an opposition that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Ramon," he ordered, using Ortiz's first name for the first time, "get our fallback team ready. We need to..." But Ortiz wasn't listening. He stared at their communications monitor where an encrypted message had just appeared. The source code made his blood run cold. "Sir," his voice cracked slightly, "this just came through our secure channel, the one only our military contacts have access to." The message was brief. "Your operation is compromised. All assets surrendering in the next 10 minutes will receive full consideration during prosecution. Resistance will be met with extreme prejudice." It was signed with a code that made Vega's professional mask crack completely, the designation for SEAL Team 3's counterterrorism division. At the ranch, Frank and Margaret continued their coordination, each movement part of James's larger strategy. The cartel teams trying to breach their positions found themselves dealing with defenders who understood professional military tactics better than they did. Northwest team attempting to regroup, Margaret reported, monitoring their security feeds, moving exactly where James said they would. "Always said professionals are predictable," Frank replied, triggering another series of defensive measures. "Can't adapt when nothing fits their training." Sangre Negro's remaining operators, caught between Sullivan's team and the ranch's defenses, began to realize the full extent of their miscalculation. They had brought military tactics to threaten a family that understood those tactics better than they did. "Stand down," their team leaders began ordering. "We're burned, complete compromise." Deputy Rodriguez, watching from his designated observation post, reported the cartel's final collapse through secure channels. "They're breaking, Sheriff. Professional operators know when they're beaten." In their command center, Vega received the reports that confirmed their operation's total failure. His military contractors, men chosen for their professional experience, were surrendering to an opposition that had systematically dismantled their every advantage. "Sir," Ortiz's voice carried defeat. "We need to consider our options. Whoever we're really fighting, this isn't just military opposition. This is something else." Dawn was approaching, but Sangre Negro had already lost the night. Their attempt to overwhelm the Sullivan ranch with superior numbers had instead revealed the true sophistication of James's defensive strategy. At the ranch, Frank and Margaret monitored the operation's final stages. Years of James's training had prepared them for this moment, teaching them that sometimes the most effective defense wasn't about meeting force with force. It was about making your opponent's strength work against them. "They're done," Margaret observed, watching more cartel operators surrender to Sullivan's team. "Pride makes professionals predictable," Frank nodded. "They never expect ranchers to understand military tactics." The night operation had become a lesson in hubris. Sangre Negro had brought trained military contractors to threaten a small town, only to discover they were facing defenders who had turned simple farming knowledge into sophisticated tactical advantage. Dawn would soon reveal the full extent of their mistake, but the lesson was already clear. Sometimes the deadliest force wasn't the one that displayed its power openly, but the one that waited quietly, gathering strength until the perfect moment to strike. First light revealed the true extent of Sangre Negro's miscalculation. Their vehicles, positioned for what they thought would be an overwhelming assault, sat abandoned or disabled around the Sullivan ranch. Professional operators, men with years of military experience, were being processed by Sullivan's team with methodical efficiency. "Final count," Lieutenant Reyes reported, carrying a tablet with the operation tally. 28 operators in custody, 6 more contained in town. Command element isolated in their operations center. Sullivan surveyed the scene from his position near the ranch's main barn. "Casualties?" "None, sir. Non-lethal takedowns exactly as planned. Dr. Chen is treating minor injuries." In their command center, now effectively surrounded, Vega watched his tactical display show the systematic dismantling of his entire operation. Ortiz worked frantically at their communications console, trying to reach their external support network. "All our channels are locked," he reported, panic edging into his voice. "They're using military-grade equipment to isolate us. Even our emergency frequencies are compromised." "Show me the farm's defensive positions," Vega demanded, desperate to understand how they had been so completely outmaneuvered. How did we miss this? The tactical display revealed what they should have seen earlier. Every piece of farm equipment, every irrigation pattern, every seemingly random placement of storage containers was part of a sophisticated defensive network designed by someone with extensive military experience. At the farmhouse, Frank and Margaret served coffee to Sheriff Dawson while monitoring the operation's final stages through James's security network. At the ranch, Frank and Margaret continued their coordination, each movement part of James's larger strategy. The cartel teams trying to breach their positions found themselves dealing with defenders who understood professional military tactics better than they did. Northwest team attempting to regroup, Margaret reported, monitoring their security feeds, moving exactly where James said they would. "Always said professionals are predictable," Frank replied, triggering another series of defensive measures. Can't adapt when nothing fits their training. Sangre Negro's remaining operators, caught between Sullivan's team and the ranch's defenses, began to realize the full extent of their miscalculation. They had brought military tactics to threaten a family that understood those tactics better than they did. "Stand down," their team leaders began ordering. "We're burned, complete compromise." Deputy Rodriguez, watching from his designated observation post, reported the cartel's final collapse through secure channels. "They're breaking, Sheriff. Professional operators know when they're beaten." In their command center, Vega received the reports that confirmed their operation's total failure. His military contractors, men chosen for their professional experience, were surrendering to an opposition that had systematically dismantled their every advantage. "Sir," Ortiz's voice carried defeat. "We need to consider our options. Whoever we're really fighting, this isn't just military opposition. This is something else." Dawn was approaching, but Sangre Negro had already lost the night. Their attempt to overwhelm the Sullivan ranch with superior numbers had instead revealed the true sophistication of James's defensive strategy. At the ranch, Frank and Margaret monitored the operation's final stages. Years of James's training had prepared them for this moment, teaching them that sometimes the most effective defense wasn't about meeting force with force. It was about making your opponent's strength work against them. "They're done," Margaret observed, watching more cartel operators surrender to Sullivan's team. "Pride makes professionals predictable," Frank nodded. "They never expect ranchers to understand military tactics." The night operation had become a lesson in hubris. Sangre Negro had brought trained military contractors to threaten a small town, only to discover they were facing defenders who had turned simple farming knowledge into sophisticated tactical advantage. Dawn would soon reveal the full extent of their mistake, but the lesson was already clear. Sometimes the deadliest force wasn't the one that displayed its power openly, but the one that waited quietly, gathering strength until the perfect moment to strike. First light revealed the true extent of Sangre Negro's miscalculation. Their vehicles, positioned for what they thought would be an overwhelming assault, sat abandoned or disabled around the Sullivan ranch. Professional operators, men with years of military experience, were being processed by Sullivan's team with methodical efficiency. "Final count," Lieutenant Reyes reported, carrying a tablet with the operation tally. 28 operators in custody, 6 more contained in town. Command element isolated in their operations center. Sullivan surveyed the scene from his position near the ranch's main barn. "Casualties?" "None, sir. Non-lethal takedowns exactly as planned. Dr. Chen is treating minor injuries." In their command center, now effectively surrounded, Vega watched his tactical display show the systematic dismantling of his entire operation. Ortiz worked frantically at their communications console, trying to reach their external support network. "Our channels are locked," he reported, panic edging into his voice. "They're using military-grade equipment to isolate us. Even our emergency frequencies are compromised." "Show me the farm's defensive positions," Vega demanded, desperate to understand how they had been so completely outmaneuvered. How did we miss this? The tactical display revealed what they should have seen earlier. Every piece of farm equipment, every irrigation pattern, every seemingly random placement of storage containers was part of a sophisticated defensive network designed by someone with extensive military experience. At the farmhouse, Frank and Margaret served coffee to Sheriff Dawson while monitoring the operation's final stages through James's security network. "They're not just ranchers with good security," he told Vega, his voice hollow with realization. "This whole setup, it's a training ground, the kind special operations units use to practice counter-terrorism responses." Vega, watching years of careful planning collapse around him, made one final desperate attempt to salvage something. "Initiate Protocol 0, he ordered, using their emergency contingency code. "Burn everything, no evidence, no witnesses." But even this desperate move played into Sullivan's strategy. His team had already isolated and contained every potential threat. The cartel's professional operators, recognizing the futility of resistance, chose surrender over pointless violence. "Command center surrounded," Reyes reported, checking his tactical display. "All external communications blocked. They're completely isolated." Local residents emerged from their homes as morning fully arrived, revealing how the entire town had participated in their own defense. Every broken-down vehicle, every power outage, every apparent mechanical failure had been part of a coordinated resistance. Like James told us, Frank said, watching another group of cartel operators being processed. Sometimes the best weapon isn't a weapon at all. It's making your enemy's strength work against them. In their surrounded command post, Vega received the final proof of their complete defeat. Their secure systems, supposedly isolated from external access, displayed a simple message: all cartel communications intercepted, full operational details secured, surrender now. The signature block carried the SEAL Team 3 designation, followed by a personal note: "You threatened the wrong family." Dawn fully illuminated the Sullivan ranch, revealing how completely Sangre Negro had been outmaneuvered. Their military training, instead of providing advantage, had made them predictable to opponents who understood professional tactics better than they did. "Sir," Reyes approached Sullivan with updated intelligence. "Local servers have yielded significant data. This operation wasn't just about establishing new territory. They're part of something bigger." Sullivan studied the tactical display showing the final stages of Sangre Negro's collapse. "Good. That's what we really wanted. Access to their broader network." The morning sun revealed not just a defeated cartel operation, but a masterclass in defensive strategy. Sangre Negro had brought military tactics to threaten a small town, only to discover they were facing defenders who had turned simple ranch life into sophisticated tactical advantage. At the farmhouse, Frank and Margaret shared a quiet moment, watching the operation's final stages from their porch. Years of James's training had prepared them for this moment, teaching them that sometimes the most effective defense isn't about matching force with force. It's about making your opponent's strength become their greatest weakness. Morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the Sullivan kitchen as James reviewed the intelligence gathered from Sangre Negro's captured command center. What had started as a defense of his family's ranch had unveiled something far more sinister. "Their operational files go deep," Reyes reported, spreading documents across the kitchen table. "Sangre Negro isn't just another cartel. They're a front for something bigger." Frank studied the tactical maps they'd recovered, his farmer's eyes catching details others might miss. The supply routes, they're using agricultural shipping networks, hiding their real cargo in plain sight. In the town's small sheriff's office, Vega sat in quiet fury as Sullivan entered. The cartel leader's professional demeanor had cracked, revealing the rage of a man who realized too late he'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," Vega snarled. "Sangre Negro is just one piece of a much larger operation." "We know exactly what we found," Sullivan replied calmly. "Your organization's been using small towns as cover for years. Military-grade operations disguised as ordinary criminal activity." Margaret arrived with Sheriff Dawson, carrying more files recovered from their surveillance system. Their communications mentioned something called Project Shadowgate. Multiple references to government contracts and private security firms. Sullivan's team had spent the morning processing captured cartel operators, but these weren't ordinary criminals. Their tactical training and professional backgrounds painted a disturbing picture. Ex-military, Reyes confirmed, reviewing their identifications, special forces backgrounds, private security experience. These aren't cartel soldiers. They're professional operators working under criminal cover. Deputy Rodriguez burst in with urgent news. Just intercepted communications between their command center and someone high up. Government channels, military-grade encryption. Because this was never just about drug trafficking, Sullivan explained, studying the evidence. Sangre Negro is a front for private military contractors operating on U.S. soil, using criminal enterprises to mask their real activities. At the ranch, Frank and Margaret continued coordinating with local residents who'd helped expose the operation. Elena's diner had become an impromptu intelligence center, sharing information gathered from months of observing cartel movements. They were too professional, Elena explained to the county investigators who had finally arrived. Real cartel. Soldiers, they're brutal but sloppy. These men moved like military units, always watching, always planning. Dr. Chen arrived with medical records from treated cartel operators. Their injuries show professional training, combat experience. One had surgical scars consistent with military field operations. In their captured command center, Ortiz's encrypted files revealed layers of complexity. Shell companies, government contracts, connections to private security firms with classified military access. Sir? Reyes called Sullivan's attention to their tactical display. We're picking up new movement, multiple vehicles approaching from the north, government plates, but something's off about their registration. Because they're not really federal agents, Sullivan replied, his expression hardening. Sangre Negro's real bosses are trying to contain their exposure, activate Protocol Echo. Sheriff Dawson's deputies, positioned at strategic points around Copper Canyon, began implementing Sullivan's contingency plan. Years of preparing the town's defense had included protocols for exactly this situation. Incoming vehicles are being redirected, Rodriguez reported. Jack's got the main road blocked with farm equipment. Elena's school bus broke down perfectly across the bridge. The morning revealed more of Sangre Negro's true nature. Their captured equipment wasn't standard cartel gear. It was professional military hardware, the kind restricted to government. Operators and authorized contractors. These aren't just weapons, Frank observed, examining their seized equipment in one of the secure barns. This is tactical gear meant for covert operations, not gang violence. Margaret's surveillance systems, disguised as ordinary ranch security, had captured terabytes of cartel communications. Each file revealed more connections between Sangre Negro and legitimate military operations. They're using small towns as cover, Sullivan explained to Dawson. Establishing control through criminal intimidation, then using the infrastructure for classified operations. Perfect deniability. Vega, watching his operations exposure from his cell, finally understood the full magnitude of their failure. You think stopping one cartel matters? This goes higher than you can imagine. Government contracts, classified operations, private military. We know exactly how high it goes. Sullivan cut him off. That's why we let your operation get this far. We needed access to your complete network. The town's coordinated resistance had yielded more than just tactical victory. Every resident who'd participated had gathered pieces of intelligence, creating a comprehensive picture of Sangre Negro's true purpose. Their supply routes match military logistics patterns, Reyes noted, reviewing captured files. Using criminal operations as cover for official movement, classified shipments hidden in plain sight. Local ranchers reported suspicious activities they'd observed over months, unusual vehicle movements, professional security patterns, military-style communications equipment hidden in ordinary trucks. They thought we were simple country folk, Jack Peterson commented as he helped secure captured equipment. Never occurred to them that ranchers notice everything about their land, every vehicle track, every unusual movement. Sullivan's team continued processing intelligence as federal response units finally approached Copper Canyon. But these weren't ordinary law enforcement. Their movement patterns showed special operations training. "Sir," Reyes warned, monitoring approach vectors on their tactical display, "these aren't regular federal agents. They're moving like tactical teams." "Because Sangre Negro's real operators are trying to contain their exposure," Sullivan explained. Grimly, "can't let their connection to legitimate military operations become public." At the ranch, Frank and Margaret activated the final phase of their defense systems. Years of James's training had prepared them for this possibility. Dealing with professional operators disguised as legitimate authority. "Remember what James taught us," Margaret said, monitoring their perimeter. "Sometimes the biggest threats come wearing badges." The morning had revealed Sangre Negro as more than just another cartel. Their operation in Copper Canyon had exposed a complex network of private military contractors using criminal enterprises as cover for classified operations. "This is why they targeted small towns," Sullivan explained to his team. "Perfect infrastructure for covert movement. Local law enforcement easily controlled, minimal federal oversight. Sheriff Dawson's deputies maintained their containment positions as more suspicious federal vehicles approached. The town's coordinated resistance had evolved into something more sophisticated, a defense against professional operators attempting to bury evidence of their operation. They thought they could just roll into town," Dawson observed, watching another fake federal team being redirected. Never considered that ranchers could understand military tactics. The morning sun climbed higher as Copper Canyon prepared for the next phase of their defense. Sangre Negro had brought professional military operators to threaten a small town, only to discover they were facing defenders who understood covert operations better than they did. Sullivan's team had transformed a simple ranch defense into exposure of a national security threat. Private military contractors operating on U.S. soil using criminal enterprises as cover for classified operations. Now facing the kind of opposition they never expected to find in a small ranching town, the real battle for Copper Canyon was just beginning. Not against cartel soldiers, but against professional operators trying to bury their connection to legitimate military operations. They would soon learn why threatening the family of a SEAL team commander was a mistake that would expose everything they'd tried to hide. The first fake federal response team arrived in Copper Canyon shortly before noon. Their black SUVs carrying all the right markings, but moving with the unmistakable precision of private military operators. Sullivan watched their approach through tactical displays, noting their professional formation. 4 vehicles, standard tactical spacing, Reyes reported, monitoring their movement patterns. They're good, using official channels, proper credentials, but their movement pattern is private contractors, Sullivan finished. Probably ex-special forces. They're here to clean up Sangre Negro's exposure. In their makeshift detention center, Vega's expression shifted from defeat to something like anticipation as he heard the approaching vehicles. Now you'll understand what you're really dealing with. Margaret's surveillance system, far more sophisticated than typical ranch security, tracked the new arrivals' communication patterns. They're using restricted frequencies, she reported, military channels that shouldn't be available to federal agents. Frank watched from their reinforced barn as the vehicles approached the sheriff's office. They're moving like James's unit. professional tactical formation. These aren't law enforcement. The team's leader emerged from the lead vehicle, his suit perfectly pressed, credentials appearing immaculate. "Agent Thompson, Federal Task Force," he announced to Sheriff Dawson. "We're here to take custody of all detained suspects and evidence." Dawson had been briefed for this scenario. "Interesting," he replied calmly, "because we just got word from the actual federal response team. They're still 3 hours out." The false agent's expression didn't change, but his hand moved slightly toward his concealed weapon. "There must be some confusion. Our authority comes directly from private military contractors." Sullivan's voice carried across the street as he emerged from concealment. "Probably Blackwater Security, based on your movement patterns. Here to clean up Sangre Negro's connection to classified operations." The professional mask cracked slightly. These men weren't used to being identified so easily, especially not in small rural towns. Their tactical positioning shifted subtly, preparing for potential conflict. "You're interfering with a federal operation," Thompson tried again, his voice hardening. "No," Sullivan cut him off. "We're exposing private military contractors using criminal enterprises as cover for unauthorized operations on U.S. soil, and you're here to make sure that connection never becomes public." At the ranch, Margaret continued monitoring their encrypted communications. "They're calling for backup," she reported through their secure channel. "Multiple teams converging on Copper Canyon." "Good," Sullivan replied. "Means we can expose their entire network." Lieutenant, implement Protocol Sierra. Reyes's team moved with practiced efficiency, using the town's prepared defensive positions to counter the private contractor's tactical advantage. Years of Sullivan's training had created a sophisticated response network, disguised as ordinary small-town infrastructure. "Sir," Rodriguez reported urgently, "more vehicles approaching from the south. Same profile. Fake federal. Credentials, professional military movement patterns." In their command center, Sullivan's team processed intelligence from the captured cartel documents. Each file revealed more connections between Sangre Negro and private military operations. "They're using cartel violence as cover," Reyes explained, displaying tactical maps on their screens. "Establish control through criminal intimidation, then use the infrastructure for classified movement. Perfect deniability." The false federal team, realizing their cover was compromised, shifted to more aggressive tactics. "This is now a matter of national security," Thompson declared. "Anyone interfering will be detained under anti-terrorism protocols." "Interesting choice," Sullivan replied. "Using counter-terrorism laws to protect private military contractors operating illegally on U.S. soil. That should make for compelling evidence." At Elena's diner, local residents watched more suspicious vehicles arrive. Elena's years serving Border Patrol had taught her to recognize professional operators trying to blend in. These men moved too precisely, their civilian act too practiced. "They're setting up containment positions," she reported through the town's hidden communication network. "Just like the cartel did, but more professional." Dr. Chen's clinic received an unexpected visit from one of the fake federal teams. "We're here to secure medical records of all treated suspects," their leader announced smoothly. "Of course," she replied, appearing to cooperate while implementing Sullivan's counterintelligence protocols. "Though you might want to explain why federal agents are using private military tactical frequencies." The morning revealed more of Sangre Negro's true nature. Their operation wasn't just about criminal territory. It was infrastructure for unauthorized military operations, using cartel violence as cover for classified movement. "Show them what we found," Sullivan instructed Reyes. "Let's see how they explain private military contractors using cartel routes for classified shipments." The tactical display revealed the full scope of their operation. Shell companies, government contracts, connections to private security firms, all using criminal enterprises to mask military-grade operations on U.S. soil. "You have no idea what you're exposing," Thompson warned, his professional demeanor cracking further. "This goes higher than you can imagine." "We know exactly how high it goes," Sullivan replied. "That's why we let Sangre Negro's operation proceed. This far, we needed to identify their entire network." Frank and Margaret watched from their strategic positions as more private contractors arrived, each team moving with the precision that came from extensive military experience. Their ranch's defenses, designed to counter professional operators, were about to face their ultimate test. "Remember what James said," Margaret commented, activating another layer of surveillance. "Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones wearing badges." The false federal teams began implementing standard containment protocols, not realizing the town's infrastructure had been prepared to counter exactly these tactics. Every attempt to establish control was met with sophisticated resistance disguised as ordinary civilian activity. "They're trying to access the evidence storage," Reyes reported. "3 teams using professional breach tactics." "Let them get close," Sullivan ordered. "Then show them why private contractors shouldn't underestimate small towns." The confrontation was evolving into something unprecedented. Private military operators facing a small town defended by one of the world's most elite counter-terrorist units. Every professional tactic was met with precise countermeasures. Every attempt at control exposed more of their unauthorized operation. Sheriff Dawson, coordinating with Sullivan's team, watched the private contractors mounting frustration. "They never expected this level of resistance," he observed, "especially not from a ranching community." "That's their weakness," Sullivan replied. "Professional operators always underestimate civilian capability. Never occurs to them that simple ranchers could understand military tactics." The sun climbed higher as Copper Canyon transformed from a quiet ranching town into the front line of exposing unauthorized military operations on U.S. soil. Sangre Negro had been just the beginning. Their defeat had revealed a complex network of private contractors using criminal enterprises as cover for classified movement. And now, those contractors were learning why threatening a SEAL commander's family was the kind of mistake that exposed everything they tried to hide. The private military contractors launched their first coordinated assault just after noon. 4 teams moving with precise tactical formation toward the Sullivan Ranch. Their objective was clear: secure all evidence of Sangre Negro's connection to unauthorized military operations. Multiple teams approaching, Reyes reported from his observation post. Standard professional pattern, using federal response protocols as cover. Sullivan watched their movement through tactical displays, noting their sophisticated approach. They're good, using official channels, proper credentials. But they're making the same mistake Sangre Negro did, underestimating ranchers. Frank tested their defensive positions, monitoring their sectors. "Ready to activate the outer perimeter?" "Do it," Sullivan confirmed. The contractor's lead team discovered too late why the Sullivan Ranch had defeated Sangre Negro so easily. Every approach had been prepared for professional military response. Every defensive position designed to counter tactical operations. "We're getting signal interference," their team leader reported. "Communications compromised. Someone's using military-grade countermeasures." Thompson, coordinating from their command vehicle, watched his tactical display with growing concern. "These aren't civilian defenses. We're facing professional opposition." At the farmhouse, Margaret coordinated with their network of local observers. Elena's diner, Jack's repair shop, even Dr. Chen's clinic. Every business in Copper Canyon had become part of a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation. "They've got teams trying to access the evidence storage," Margaret reported through their secure channel, "using standard breach tactics." "Let them get close," Sullivan instructed. "Show them why private contractors shouldn't underestimate small towns." The contractor's second team, attempting to establish a containment perimeter, found themselves dealing with terrain that seemed to actively fight them. Every tactical position they tried to secure had been prepared to work against professional operators. "Sir," their team leader called Thompson, "someone's compromised our tactical advantage. These defensive positions, they're designed specifically to counter our protocols." In their makeshift detention center, Vega watched the contractors, mounting frustration with growing realization. "You never understood what you were really dealing with," he told his guards bitterly. "This isn't just about one ranch." Sheriff Dawson coordinated with Sullivan's team while maintaining the appearance of normal law enforcement activity. His deputies, positioned strategically throughout town, reported every contractor movement. "They're trying to establish control points," Rodriguez reported. "Same positions Sangre Negro used, but more professional." "Because they trained Sangre Negro," Sullivan explained. "Private military contractors using cartels as cover for unauthorized operations. Now they're trying to bury the evidence." The contractor's third team attempted to access the captured cartel documents using sophisticated breach techniques. Instead, they found themselves facing defenses designed by someone with intimate knowledge of professional military tactics. Multiple teams stalled, Reyes reported with professional satisfaction. "They're realizing this isn't standard civilian resistance." Thompson received reports of complete tactical failure from all teams. His professional operators, men with extensive military experience, were being systematically countered by defenses that shouldn't exist in a small ranching town. "Fall back and regroup," he ordered. "We need to reassess our approach," but retreat wasn't an option anymore. Sullivan's team had used the contractor's assault attempt to gather evidence of their unauthorized operation. Every radio transmission, every tactical movement, every piece of professional equipment, all documented and transmitted to secure servers. "Sir," Reyes called Sullivan's attention to their tactical display. "We're picking up new communications. Their actual command structure is getting involved." Through their surveillance network, they intercepted calls between Thompson and his superiors. Each conversation revealed more connections between private military contractors and unauthorized operations on U.S. soil. "They're calling in everything," Margaret reported, monitoring their communications. "Multiple teams, heavy equipment, professional operators. They can't afford to let this exposure stand." Frank watched from their reinforced barn as more contractor vehicles arrived. They're not even trying to maintain their federal cover anymore, moving like military units now. The tactical situation was evolving into something unprecedented. private military contractors facing a small town defended by one of the world's most elite counter-terrorism units. Every professional tactic was met with precise countermeasures. Every attempt at control exposed more of their unauthorized operation. "Show me what we've gathered," Sullivan instructed Reyes. Their tactical display revealed the full scope of the contractors' network: shell companies, government connections, classified operations, all using criminal enterprises as cover. "They've been operating for years," Reyes explained, pointing to connection patterns on their screens, "using cartels like Sangre Negro to establish control of rural areas. Perfect infrastructure for unauthorized movement." Thompson made one final attempt at containment. "This is now a matter of national security," he announced through official channels. "All evidence and suspects are to be surrendered immediately." "Interesting definition of national security," Sullivan replied through their network. "Private military contractors operating illegally on U.S. soil, using criminal enterprises as cover. That should make for compelling testimony." The contractors' command structure, realizing the extent of their exposure, shifted to more aggressive tactics. New teams arrived carrying equipment that shouldn't exist outside classified military operations. "They're preparing for full tactical assault," Reyes warned, monitoring their deployment patterns. "These aren't just security contractors anymore. These are professional military operators." But Copper Canyon had been prepared for exactly this scenario. Every business, every ranch, every seemingly ordinary structure had been modified to counter professional military operations. "Implement Protocol Omega," Sullivan ordered calmly. "Show them what happens when private military contractors threaten the wrong community." The sun reached its peak as Copper Canyon transformed from a quiet ranching town into the front line of exposing unauthorized military operations on U.S. soil. Sangre Negro had been just the beginning. Their defeat had revealed a complex network of private contractors using criminal enterprises as cover for classified movement. And now those contractors were learning why threatening a SEAL commander's family was the kind of mistake that exposed everything they tried to hide. The real battle for Copper Canyon was just beginning. Not against cartel soldiers, but against professional operators trying to bury their connection to unauthorized military operations. They were about to learn why some threats shouldn't be made against people who understood professional military tactics better than they did. As the dust settled over Copper Canyon, genuine federal authorities finally arrived, led by senior military officials who immediately understood the significance of what Sullivan's team had uncovered. The private contractors' operation was completely dismantled, their network exposed to the highest levels of government. Thompson and his command structure faced military justice, while congressional committees prepared full investigations into unauthorized operations on American soil. Sullivan's meticulous documentation had created an airtight case that couldn't be buried by powerful interests. 1 week later, Frank and Margaret sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint their ranch in golden hues. The last of the federal investigators had finally departed, leaving Copper Canyon to return to its quiet routine. "Never thought our little town would make history like that," Sheriff Dawson remarked, joining them for evening coffee. "Sometimes the biggest threats come from unexpected directions," Frank replied, "and the strongest defense comes from people standing together." Margaret smiled as she watched James approach from the barn. They never understood what they were facing, thought they could intimidate simple ranchers. That was their mistake. James nodded. They saw what they expected to see. Vulnerable elderly ranchers. Never looked deeper. The Sullivan Ranch had returned to its peaceful routine, having taught a powerful lesson that echoed through national security circles. Sometimes the most effective defense isn't military might or sophisticated weapons. It's the quiet strength of a community standing together, protecting what matters most. If this story resonated with you, don't miss our next incredible account of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Subscribe now by hitting that button below. It would mean the world to us and ensure you never miss another story of unexpected heroes and the powerful lessons they teach us.